His inference was you're such a skilled committee chair that he knew you would breeze through it.
Any other questions?
Moving on.
So,
If I may, Mr. Chair, at this point, I'd like to suggest we call Bill Black, and then I'd be happy to introduce him while you're calling him up.
okay.
Mr. Chair, Bill Black is an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. He was litigation director of the Federal Home Loan Bank Board in the 1980s and played a key role in overseeing the S&L crisis. He was deputy director of the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation. He was SVP and general counsel of the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco.
Yes, Mr. Black, this is Paul Holby. I'm a state representative from Oregon, and I'm chair of the House Consumer Protection Committee, and Representative Chip Shields has introduced a bill around state charter banks receiving TARP funds and wanting them to report to this body on the use of those funds. And he has just introduced you, and essentially, I guess we're looking for your testimony on this particular proposal.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And if you would identify yourself for the record, please.
My name is William K. Black. I'm an associate professor of economics and law at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. Are you there?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
thank
I
you.
need a beeping on this end.
Well, we don't hear the beeping at this end, so you're coming
I'll
through.
proceed. Your permission.
Please continue.
All right. The oversight at the federal level has, in fact, as Representative Shields has remarked, I believe, been extremely weak, and that's not outside people's head. That's the overviewers that they put in place to judge their compliance, particularly a professor from Harvard who has found really systematic problems at the federal level. So it's not a question of it's already being done at the federal level. It isn't. I think it would be beneficial from the standpoint of the state. I must say, in general, I'm a proponent of the states actively regulating their state-chartered institutions. I worked with state regulatory bodies when I was a federal regulator, and state regulatory efforts with regard to their institutions were often exceptionally important and effective. So this fits into my general view that you have a very important role to play at the state level with regard to your own institutions. It is certainly the case that disproportionately the problems in the current crisis are in the largest money center banks and investment banks and to some extent insurance companies. However, it is also the case that there are significant numbers of troubled institutions that are much smaller simply because they followed investment practices that were similar. So it doesn't matter what size of bank you are. If you went into a large number of mortgage instrument products, you will have suffered really severe losses, and that will be true regardless of which state in the nation you are in this time. So you need to know as a state, what are our institutions in, right? What is their exposure to the financial derivatives? What is their exposure to the non-prime lending? Have they reviewed the files? We've discovered that in virtually all cases, institutions that acquired non-prime assets, like CDOs, did so without ever reviewing even a sample of the files. And we've discovered from Fitch, the smallest of the three rating agencies, that when they finally, after the markets had collapsed, reviewed a small sample of the files, they found that the results were disconcerting and that there was the appearance of fraud in nearly every file. We also know that institutions in general have not been recognizing their losses adequately. which is why they keep on having these negative earning surprises, which is why the stock market valuations are trading at such a pittance, and while a number of institutions have been forced down towards penny stock levels in terms of their stock evaluations. We also know that criminal referrals are often not made, period. And that is a tremendous warning sign, given how very substantial. The FBI has been testifying about the epidemic of mortgage fraud publicly since September 2004. But when the federal entity that looks at these criminal referrals, which is FinCEN, looks, it finds incredibly patchy compliance, so that large numbers of banks have never filed a single criminal referral on mortgage fraud. Now, of course, I don't know the situation in the particular banks, but that's the point. Nobody outside those banks knows the situation, and unfortunately, sometimes the banks don't know because they have very weak controls. So that's the type of thing that you would want to look at both the regulatory level and at the oversight level of a legislature. And I'll simply conclude on this note. Virtually everyone agrees that the antidote going forward is greater transparency and to have active regulation and to have active oversight at both the state legislative level and the federal legislative level. So I encourage you and indeed applaud you for looking assertively at these issues. In the long run, this will be much better for the banks as well as for the customers.
So, thank you, Mr. Black. I have one question for you. As we consider reviewing the banks that receive TARP funds and having them report to us what they utilize those funds for, I guess my question is, what would we do with that information?
Well, I think what you would do with that information is first, simply make it public. But second, of course, the question, and it's for you, I'm not so arrogant as to tell you how to really use the information, but in your oversight role, what you may find is that institutions are sitting and not making much in the way of credit available locally at all. That has certainly been the case for a large number of national and regional banks. And if so, then of course it's going to undercut the entire purpose of TARP, and it's going to be very bad for the Oregon economy. And then at that point, as I say, it becomes a matter that's more appropriately, you're the elected officials. What do you consider appropriate if you find that problem existing? I don't presume that problem will exist, but I do say it has frequently been the problem in other jurisdictions.
Okay, thank you very much for your thoughts. Other questions from the committee? Representative Tomei.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Black, I'm wondering if you were on the Bill Moyer show recently.
Yes, ma'am.
That was very impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
No other questions for you at this time. I don't see any. I appreciate your perspective on this. I guess that I appreciate you taking the time out of your life to give us your perspective on what's going on at the federal level and what the state could or might do with transparency issues and looking at what's going on with TARP funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Committee.
Thank you.
Good night.
Representative Shields.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next person who will testify, her name is Michelle Rand. She is